Um, the vestry has talked about the issue we're going to talk about today at three different meetings that I know of. Um, and I was at all of them, I should know them. Anyway, and I think what it really boils down to, I mean, we started off with issues of safety when there were shootings in churches and that kind of stuff. And we kind of went through all kinds of different, you know, iterations of that and, you know, how do you stay safe and all these kind of things and concentrate on that side of it. And then by the end of the discussions, we ended up with this whole question of how can we be welcoming and at the same time maintain some kind of safe environment. And when I stopped and thought about that, I thought, you know what, that really ties into what the larger church, the national church and the diocese are doing, because they've, you know, we all have to take the safe church training, right? And that has changed dramatically. It used to be about kids and it used to be about sexual exploitation, that kind of thing. Now, if you've taken it recently, you'll see it has changed totally. It's about making the church a safe place, not just for kids, not just a place that they're not going to be exploited, but to make the place safe for different racial groups, to make the church a safe place for those who, you know, are different, those, you know, who might be, you know, not what everybody thinks of as an Episcopalian. And I think that's really, really interesting because this kind of goes along with that whole thing. I always like to start off, you know, starting to look at Scripture. And where are we with Scripture with welcoming in the church? Well, there's not much about welcoming in the church in the New Testament. Did you know that? You stop and think about it, you can understand why too. Why would there not be a whole lot of stuff about welcoming anyone who walks in the church?
Weren't they kind of secretly? Also?
Yeah, exactly. No, you're exactly.
Yes, they're being persecuted.
They were being persecuted by the society they lived in, of course. And so they met behind closed doors for the most part. And the only ones that were allowed into, especially the communion, were people who were vetted, that you knew were Christians, that you could trust, that wouldn't turn you over to the authorities. So you don't have a whole lot of that in the New Testament. So where did the Episcopal Church, do you remember when this sign came about? The Episcopal Church welcomes you. You remember the shield and all that stuff? You remember when it came about?
It's in the 60s?
Yeah, it was. There's a lot of stuff that happened in the 60s and very early 70s. A lot of stuff. And it's really funny because I remember my father, God rest his soul. My father and mother were staunch Episcopalians, old-time Episcopalians. My father did not like the language change. He didn't think the prayer book needed to be changed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He says, yeah, you know, instead of saying it with thy spirit, we say, and also with you, bub. That's what my dad always said. And it was really, in the church I was in, it wasn't presented well. Because I think if people had known where the prayers that they were wanting to use came from, and that they were much more ancient than the ones we were using, and all of those kinds of issues, I think if they had seen that, they would have been much more accepting of it. But the fact is, they thought it was a social move. It was a social movement, is what they were thinking this was about. The baptismal covenant changes, right? That's the first time in what they called the new prayer book that you see respect the dignity of every human being. And especially when you live in Montgomery, Alabama, in the midst of the civil rights issues, and there are marches in Selma and all this stuff is going on. And in the church, they're changing that whole theology, that whole ethos about welcoming people into the church that are different. You know, as far as my dad was concerned, a lot of people in the church was concerned, it was just a social thing. It was a thing that was kind of mirroring society. Oh, we're trying to be modern. so we're going to use modern language. When in actuality, the reason we were using the Lord be with you and also with you is because in Koine Greek, it's in that kind of conversational speaking. And in fact, if you take it to where in the language that they used in the 28 book, that was conversational in the time the 28 book was written. So actually and also with you would have been much more formal. But see, that was never passed on as to why we were doing this, why this shift took place. And along with that shift came this whole issue of we've got to start inviting people into the church. And so they came up with this big campaign about the Episcopal Church welcomes you. Regardless of who you are, they welcome you. And you might remember it's not long after that, we have ordination of women. We have all kinds of things that get started like that. And the church just starts opening up. So there's always risk when you open up, right? There's always risk. Well, we're going to have people come in that, might not be our kind of people. Really? And you start having to question, who am I? And what is it that I really believe? And what is it that I really acknowledge in terms of the people that are walking through the door? And we saw that very, very clearly in some conversations that we had in the vestry. Because we make assumptions about people just by what they look like or what they're dressed. And that kind of thing, Trinity has always had a wonderful history of being welcoming and accepting of people walking through the door, whether they were dressed poorly, whether they smelled, whether they, were hungry or whatever that might be. Come and worship with us. The door's open to you. That's been a big theme here, right? And so when you start looking at this whole issue, that starts feeding into it. I mean, we talked about, we had panic buttons installed, and that's where, the ushers wear their panic button in case there's a shooting or something. They can push it and the police come. We talked about hiring off-duty law enforcement officers just to be here, during churches. And then we talked about plans to lock the door during the service, and only so you vet people that are coming in. Well, that's fine as long as you know them. But if you don't know them, then we get into that real area. What do they dress like? What do they look like? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think I'll ever forget. I went to Boston one year. Naomi and I went to study with Barry Brazelton. I don't know if any of you were familiar with that name. He did a lot of work in terms of understanding that parents want the best for their children, for the most part. Even bad parents want the best for their children. And one of the exercises he did, and maybe some of you have done this in some other venue, but he would put up a picture of a person. And he said, now I want you to tell me, when I put up this picture of a person, is this a good person? Is this a bad person? Is this a convict? Is this a, person that's dangerous? What? And he started going through these pictures of just faces of these people. And it was astounding to see people around the room and how they answered the question of who these people were. And of course, his position was, if this is a parent of one of the kids that I bring in, how much do I judge the kid by what the parent looks like, right? But we go through this kind of judgment cycle too. And what we discovered was, all of us in that room discovered that all of us made prejudicial judgment calls on people in terms of what they look like. And we got real surprised. One person, we say, that's a bad guy. That's a bad guy. It was a doctor who worked in the hospital, there were so many different examples of people misjudging people because of all kinds of different reasons. And that happens in the church, all the time. It does. So we're trying to, in a sense, repent of that and to see people as people. How do you really get to know a person? How do you know who a person is?
Spending time with them.
What's that?
Spending time with them.
Yeah, spending time with them, have a conversation, listen to what they have to say. Because typically when you listen to what they have to say, you can figure out real quick, what's going on and who this person is, and you can make a new friend, a person that perhaps you didn't expect to. Now, we started off this whole discussion in vestry because of shootings that were taking places in churches. And so I decided to do a little investigation in terms of what the percentages are of that taking place. And what would you say is the percentage of a shooting? Where do you think the most common places where those kind of things take place? There was just one last night. God help us.
Mass shootings or
Mass shootings or any kind of an altercation like that. Where would you say is the most common place?
Shopping malls.
Shopping malls.
Schools.
Schools. Yeah.
Nightclubs.
Nightclubs. What we have, the largest, according to the FBI, areas of commerce were the most targeted locations. And those included, ready for this? You got the malls right. Grocery stores. Any place where people gather and spend money. And they also include in with that businesses, because there's an awful lot of that kind of stuff that have to do with disgruntled employees coming back in and doing those kinds of things. So they said that 31% of these incidents happen in businesses that are open to pedestrian traffic. 13% happen in businesses that are closed to pedestrian traffic. And then we have open spaces, concerts, that kind of stuff. That has about 37%. That's a high percentage too. Government buildings, 26%. And you could understand some of that. People going wild. Residences are about 12%. Healthcare facilities are 12%. Education are 42%. So you've got a high one for education, which is so sad. Colleges and institutions of higher learning have about 15%, and houses of worship are 4%. We are the lowest group of all the groups in terms of being at risk of having that take place while we're here.
Are percent of what the total
The total, yeah,
shootings or
right.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So education is almost half, 40%.
Yeah. And one of the interviews they did with a woman who was the mother of one of the children at, what was it, Sandy Hook?
Connecticut.
And one of the interviews they did with her, they said, what does that do to you going out in public? I mean, does it just terrify you or what? She said, you tell me one place other than your own house behind a locked door where you're going to be safe in society. She said, so you just learn to live with it. And that, in fact, is the way the American population is wrestling. That's what they're wrestling with right now. How do we do this? How do we live with it? Compared to a lot of other venues, the church is really, 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 really low incident. But there's been a lot of discussion in the church in the past year, a lot of discussion. What, in fact, should the church do? And that's what our vestry was talking about, too. What is the number one, and I think this is probably really important information. What's the number one deterrent for someone coming and doing something crazy in this building, in this institution? What do you think it would be? What do you think would give that person pause and say, I don't know if I ought to be doing this?
A locked door.
locked doors,
Somebody's welcoming or somebody saying hello.
somebody saying hi, yeah. The number one deterrent is signage that tells that there is surveillance of the area.
Oh,
That is the number one deterrent. So a person that walks up to whatever door, they can see some kind of signage that says there is active surveillance going on. We've got your picture. And that's the number one deterrent. And the second deterrent has to do with people engaging people. You're exactly right. And listening to what they have to say, etc. And oftentimes, if there's a problem, of de-escalating the situation to where there might not be as big a problem. I mean, some people are going to do bad things no matter what you do. But the fact is, if you engage them and you know that, at least you have an opportunity to respond to it. Yes, go ahead.
some percentage of these shooters are either on a suicide mission or looking to be known in history, their moment of fame.
Right.
So I'm assuming that for those cases, it wouldn't matter. In fact, it would play right into their hands to
Right.
have a sign saying you're being under surveillance.
Exactly. And that's what they say makes it so difficult, because most of the people that are doing this aren't mentally ill. I mean, they're not schizophrenic or something. Most of the people that are doing this are just, like you say, have all these crazy reasonings that they're going to do this kind of thing, you know? And then such a significant number of them kill themselves, so you don't even know why they actually did it to begin with. So it's really a goofy place. One of the things that really makes us at risk as the church too, especially when we're at worship, one of the other major deterrents is to pay attention to what's going on around you. I mean, we teach this to our kids all the time, right? Pay attention to who's around you, what's going on around you, and so you know how you can respond. It's really hard to do that when the whole focus of worship is internal and to, in the altar and the preaching and the music, and everybody is facing this direction. It's really hard to pay attention to what's going on around you when the whole purpose that you're there for is to not pay attention to what's going on around you, but to pay attention to what's going on in the church itself. So by our very mission, we're vulnerable. There's no question about that. That's why some churches have done things such as they trust ushers to pay attention. They also have security teams, not armed security teams, but people that they take turns during the day, either just paying attention, and that's their job for that morning, is to pay attention to what's going on and trying to give people some sense of ease as they worship. One of the things that I think is really interesting about the church too is we welcome people who many in the world don't welcome. We like to talk about people on the edges, We welcome people who are mentally ill. I had a guy, you might remember, well, most of you don't go to 8 o'clock, so you probably wouldn't. This fellow, he came to the canteen for a long time, but he's alcoholic, and he came into the church, and I'll never forget, came down to the front, sat down in the pew, cracked a can of beer, started drinking it. Everybody looked at me like, well, what are you going to do? I said, nothing. I said, go ahead and enjoy yourself, And he came back week after week after week after week. Somebody that you had to pay attention to, obviously, but somebody that still was welcome to come back in the church and to worship with us and to do what it is that, you were there to do. I had one person who came in to my church in Nebraska who wanted to preach. And when I wouldn't allow him to preach, he got very, very irritated and that was about as close a time as I've come that we really had to call the police and have him removed because he was schizophrenic and he just was, I want to preach. Well, I can't let you preach. Then we had, does everybody remember the era in which we started locking churches? Was there a time when Trinity was open all the time?
Yes.
You don't remember it being locked? Yeah, it was open. This occurred. I remember the time specifically. The churches I had when I first was ordained in '85 were all open. They were open all the time. By the time that I got to 1989, and they were open all the time. By the time I got to 1990, we only left the chapel open because we were having problems with people breaking in offices, that kind of thing. Start tracking that with economics and you start seeing a real
Are you
interest in
talking
that.
about locked when nobody's there?
Yeah.
Oh, I think our church has
Always been locked.
Here.
Oh, no, we used to leave them open 24 hours a day.
I know churches that have done that recently, even in the country.
And then what we ended up doing is we had a chapel that was beside the church. And so what we did is we locked the main church and left the chapel open. So if people would come in and pray and so forth and so on. And finally, we had to lock that too, because we had people that would come in and use spray paint and do graffiti and do that kind of stuff. So we ended up having to lock that at night as well. But in most churches these days are locked. You can't get in them. And even during the week, typically they're locked. And you have to press a button and, that kind of stuff. Look at the shift in society between when you leave all that stuff open and now you don't do that. And that's the norm. How about your house? Anybody remember when you never used to lock your house? No. Bob says no, I don't.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But I mean, a lot of people used to leave their houses unlocked all the time. And part of that depends on where you lived, didn't it? I mean, Naomi was raised downstate. She always locked her house. Thank you very much. And it didn't prevent people from coming and breaking in the house, even if it was locked. So, but you would never think of leaving it unlocked. People in the country, in rural areas, often left their houses unlocked. They used to tell me all the time, if you want to come visit, just come on in. You don't have to knock on the door, ring the door, just come on in. And I always thought that was rather.
I would note that one of the big issues for locking homes and churches and so forth is not violence so much as theft.
Yes.
And of course, we have had that issue here. It's a good reason to engage with people too.
Mhm.
A potential thief is going to feel a little shy if in fact he's been talked to and so forth and well.
Yeah. Right. So you had a time period in Trinity where you had a lot of theft going on, that kind of thing.
I don't think so. That I can recall reports at times about concerns about theft with people
Mhm.
and with suspicions.
We had a lot of bunch of stuff stolen by people who were in the church. Stuff. I know.
Oh,
like
right.
These VCRs and things like that.
Disappear. Yeah.
Maybe it was DVD player. I don't remember a time. I think it was in Marine.
Do you guys remember just a few years ago maybe 4 years ago, when the fellow went to church, did all this kind of stuff. And then right after the offertory, he grabbed all the money out of the thing and just walked out. Remember that? It was kind of like, okay. And of course we had him on a camera. And so the police said, oh, we know who this is, when they picked him up. But I mean, all kinds of crazy things happen in the church. And part of that, I think, is because the church is an open place and we are welcoming to most all people. And I think the real concern that people had in the vestry, they want to be safe and they want to have everyone feel comfortable. But at the same time, they want to be welcoming and open to people that want to go to church. I think that was the issue. Would that be true? Those, the vestry members that are here that remember the discussion?
I also remember, I don't know if it was discussed in the vestry, but I remember in my own mind thinking that are we actually getting a real representation of how big a problem this is?
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is that with the way communication is now and social media, you tend to hear a lot of the bad news.
Mhm.
Even in the news that we see, if it leads, it leads. So it's very hard to know, are you getting a true representation of how bad this problem is?
Mhm.
I don't doubt it's bad in some areas, but I never really had a good understanding of how bad it is in our own particular little area.
Don't you think that also links to the issue of the incidents in churches?
Mhm.
But the thing, when things happen in churches or synagogues, it's national news and everybody's scared from that.
Mhm.
But the denominator is very small, in terms of the actual numbers.
4%, you know.
Yeah,
Spread
You're-
over the entire nation,
Right.
over all the days in a year, it's gotta be minuscule.
Tens of thousands of
So you
churches.
try to
Yeah.
find that balance, but you're not sure what the facts are when you're trying to find that balance.
There is one other aspect. Church is where we come together in love.
Mhm.
We just inherently feel safe here. We want to continue to feel safe here. And then, here with murderous rampage in a church somewhere in the country is very, very unsettling. I don't think we go into a shopping mall or a grocery store with the same kind of trust and openness as we come into this church.
Oh, that's true. Absolutely true, Pete.
Then violence becomes particularly unsettling because the basic trust has been attacked or destroyed. Another thing that was on my mind as a member of the vestry is, what is my responsibility as a member of the vestry to ensure congregation is safe?
Mhm.
That might push me towards at 10 o'clock sharp, we lock all the doors, batten down every hatch we can possibly think of. But as a Christian, my sentiment is no.
Mhm.
There are folks out there that need us, never mind, locking out one of our own who's running a little late.
None of our people ever arrive late, do they?
There are folks
Oh,
love that our congregation has to offer. And it becomes a very difficult balancing act for me as a member of the vestry. Where do I ultimately come down? And for myself, speaking for myself, I come down on the side of don't be stupid, but be open.
that's true. Any of the other vestry members want to weigh in on that? Go ahead.
I was on the side of, yeah, we gotta do this, even though it's distasteful, but in those vestry discussions and time between, when I was thinking about it, I moved away from that. I think Jenny commented early on the side of, we should be about love and not safety, didn't you? Or-
I'm against locking the door.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I remember her talking about that and made me think more. And I gradually moved away from that, but I didn't have any answers. I just didn't have an automatic, yeah, we gotta do it.
Well, there's some things that played into this too. Some things we found out that really do make a difference in the kind of decisions we make about this. Number one, we looked long and hard and advertised if there were people, off-duty police officers, whoever we could hire to be in here during that period of time. There are not. They are extremely rare. You have to be really lucky just to simply, have a person like that, because they just, the demand is so high. And I would presume that's the case, that you just can't find people like that very easily. The second thing that we found out is the more we started talking about how do we pay attention to who comes in the building while we're at worship, right? Remember these discussions? it is real difficult because there are so many opportunities to come into the building, be in the building, and nobody even knows you're in the building. I mean, how many times have I set off an alarm when somebody was in the building and I thought there was nobody there? And these were staff members, Tim or somebody was upstairs. I didn't know they were upstairs. They would call and they didn't hear you. I mean, this happens all the time. And so one of the things that we came to figure out is you can pay attention, but it's very difficult to say, we can guarantee you when we go to worship, nobody's in the building but those in worship. No, that's going to be real hard to do.
One of my points is the person who you don't want in could come in at 10 of. And if you worry only about after 10 o'clock when the service starts, they're already here.
They're already here.
You can't
That's right.
protect it.
There was a fellow that used to come into church in Sayre who was dressed completely in camos, carried a big camo backpack, sit in the second row. I'm thinking, oh God, what are we doing? I can go through every church I've served and go through story after story after story. This was common. What was this fellow doing? Well, he thought he was in the army. He was going to church with his army uniform and the whole thing. God bless him, But I mean, he scared the dickens out of people. And of course, he would come week after week after week, and that scared him even more. And nobody would say anything to him. I mean, I would say something to him. I knew his name and so forth, but nobody else really wanted to talk to him because he scared him. And, so I mean, this happens over and over. It's just a human dynamic that we deal with. But with the gospel, one of the things in the psalm really hit me this morning. Does anybody have a bulletin with them?
Yeah.
Oh. I really was struck by this in the psalm. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom then shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom then shall I be afraid? And I think, yeah, that's true. I mean, if that's really what we believe, then bad things happen to good people. We understand that. But if Lord's the light of our life, then the fact is that, it's worth the risk to be open. Not to be stupid, like you say, Peter, but at least to be open. Let's see. One of the things that people concern themselves with all the time are homeless people. And if you ever are curious about doing an experiment, put yourself in the position of a person who doesn't have a home. Okay? They're on the street. Where do you go during the day if it's cold?
The library.
Yeah, the library. That's where you end up going, because those kind of public buildings are open. A lot of the government buildings are even closed these days, but the library typically is open. They used to go to churches, where you could at least be warm. You could at least, get a little respite. But I'll tell you, especially if you arrive in a town that you don't know, you get off the bus down here at the bus station, where are you going to go? And, they're in really difficult shape. They really are. And, there are people that work with the homeless, obviously, but there are also, it seems to me, there's an obligation as Christians to pay attention to those that are in need. Not that we can solve all their problems, but at least to treat them with some dignity and some respect, because I certainly wouldn't want to be there. And I'm sorry to say that two of my brothers have been homeless. One was homeless on the streets of Denver for almost 40 years. Through the winters, it was awful. It was just awful. And there wasn't anything anybody could do about it. That's just the way it was. Now he's in a care home, mainly because of those 4 years. You know, he's very ill. He's got dementia. So I mean, you know, but I mean, it's just, what do you do? He lost everything and said, you know, okay, I'll just live on the street. And I mean, I would always pray somebody take care of him, you know. And so, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of close to home, you know. It happens to us, to our families. So what can we do? I guess this becomes the issue for me. What can we do to be reasonably help people feel more comfortable in when they're in worship, when they're in church? What can we do systematically, maybe, to assist in that? You got any thoughts about that?
For the church service, I think one thing that we often do very well, but still, you know, notice people who aren't part of our regular congregation, go greet them, talk to them and so forth.
Mhm.
Don't let them just sort of slip out anonymously if you can help it. I mean, some people want to.
Sure.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. That's really important. Good job.
What else can we do?
We're new here.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was thinking when we first came is that people did come up to us.
Mhm.
You're new. And that was very welcome.
Mhm.
And as I'm thinking back, and now as you're talking about safety, I don't know if you already do it or not. But like, let's say the ushers.
Mhm.
They're like guards at the door.
Mhm.
And then also they can be the welcoming.
Yeah.
And it would become their responsibility as being ushers to constantly be on the look
Mhm.
for what is going on. And also to do the follow-up
Mhm.
afterwards, you know, to greet and introduce them and so on. And it would be a responsibility that you could then, as a parishioner, could like hand over.
Mhm.
And not have to worry about checking your bag.
Mhm.
You've got somebody on your six.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Ushers have done that forever.
Yeah.
Jenny, I mean, it's just a part of what you do. There's another piece of that was added to it, that you are much more likely to encounter a person with a medical emergency in church than you are somebody coming into the church to do something bad. And we are very fortunate that we've got a lot of people. We have several of the ushers who have medical training in their background. They can respond to those kinds of things, which is makes me more comfortable. That's for sure. And I've had a few experiences where people have gone down during church and everything stops. You know, as soon as the person hits the pew or hits the floor, everything stops. Music stops, people stop. You know, and until somebody can reach them and do something to at least look and see what the situation is. And we're really fortunate that we've got some people that are and they're willing to do that, you know. I'm not looking at Pat for any reason. She's a nurse, or Jenny, she's a nurse, or other people that have had some of that training. It's a marvelous thing. But yeah, ushers are huge. They're so important. They're so important.
But the additional responsibilities,
Mhm.
as you outlined them, is making it more difficult, I think, to secure ushers because
I don't think that's happened yet.
you don't think it has?
No,
Oh,
we have the
good.
same ushers we've had. I just
Good.
got a new one today, but Manzo. But
Uh-huh.
wanted to be an usher.
Oh, good. So it's not,
I don't think that there's been anything, I don't see anything really additional to what I was already doing.
uh-huh,
Yeah.
You know,
well, the panic button thing.
That's about it, but
Yeah.
then Well, I guess if somebody is really worried, it doesn't bother me. You know what I mean? I go out in the world all over, so I'm here. Same thing as if I go to the grocery, you know, I don't worry about it. Happens, it
You have
happens.
to be a little fatalistic.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, this past year, they had CPR training.
Right.
And I participated in that, and I was really happy to have that training.
Mhm.
And I think if there was an opportunity to offer that once a year or to make people aware of where to get that, I'd take it again, just because an exercise like that should be repeated in other than a non-emergency situation. so
Sure.
that if and when the emergency arrives, you're better versed in it,
Right, right.
would be good.
Absolutely true. And who we've really got in a big part to thank for that is Nicole Huff worked on that. Jeff Fellows worked on that, as well as Darlene Croston really had a lot to do with bringing that about.
Great.
So, I mean, my hats off to all three of those because they really did a wonderful job of that.
Yeah, I was happy to have that training.
Yeah. Do you know why we lock the doors right now during the week and have to have people buzz us in?
You don't have people in here.
Yeah, that you don't know are in here. Yeah. We didn't used to do that because there was an NA group in here 5 days a week, most of the morning into the early afternoon. And so you had people coming in and out all the time. So you had a lot of people around. Now those groups don't meet here during the day. And so you don't have that traffic coming in and out. But there's another reason too, and a very disconcerting reason. And that is because the shootings that have taken place in this area have increased. I mean, twice now, the police have come to us for our surveillance cameras to identify who people are, you know. When the guy's running up the side of the church with a gun, then, we say, no, lock the door. People can buzz in. And quite frankly, I don't think most people are particularly upset by that. You say, I mean, you do that all the time in offices. It's like, it's not really a big deal. But it's quite a long way from here all the way up to the offices, and if you have to walk that all the time, you really figure out how long it is. And without a person down here all the time, then it becomes a much dicier situation. So that's the reason we lock doors. I don't know if I ever explained that to the congregation, but that's the reason why. Especially, what was it, about a year ago? We had a whole flurry of activity. There was a kid that was shot over here at the dollar store. There was another, and I'm thinking, you just need to be careful. I mean, we are a downtown church, but I'm amazed. I'm amazed that Trinity, knock on wood, has so little vandalism and so little of that stuff happening to it. And I think I've always been a believer it's because of the work you do in the community. And people know that, and they pay attention to that. At least that's what I think. John?
There's another Trinity issue that has not been an issue since the pandemic hit, but that is the canteen lunches.
Right.
Which is one of the great things that we do, I think. I think probably Steve and Barbara can speak to this better than me. But I do know that when the lunches are going, you have a whole horde of people and anybody can come. There has been concern to try to keep them from going into other parts of the church.
Right.
But I gather one central element of that is having a host or hostess. Somebody whose only job is not to serve or anything, is just to sort of keep track of people, to welcome them, and to make sure that things don't get out of hand.
Yeah.
Is that right?
We're still doing takeout.
Yeah.
It's not-
We're doing takeouts now, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and that isn't it, yeah.
Yeah, but that's true.
The experience with canteen when we had it in our dining room, or permitting, we'll have that again, was those people by and large made sure everybody behaved.
Yeah, that's
We
right.
didn't have to enforce anything. I seem to recall one time when somebody just got totally unruly and we had to have them removed. And that was a great great exception. It was always admirable how those guests of ours made sure everybody toed the line and behaved.
That's
Well,
true.
They didn't behave as guests because they felt this was their home.
Yeah.
For that,
Mhm.
at least at that particular time,
Right.
which is, I think, an important part of it too. When you take ownership of something, we all do this every Sunday morning. We take ownership of that sanctuary. We pick up when somebody leaves a piece of paper. I mean, that's a little thing, but we take ownership in ways that we're not even aware we're doing because it's our home. So I think that does happen with guests when they come into Canton.
You got a great point there. We've seen some of the canteen folks in our services.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Love it. Love them.
In fact, some that haven't been there since the pandemic started, who I really wonder about in this, I don't know. There's several of them. I don't know how in the world we'd ever get a hold of them, but they're not coming to pick up meals either. So, but some of those were anyway. They were people you would recognize. One guy that used to shake all the time, shake horribly. God bless him. And I always used to ask him, "How you doing?" He said, "I'm getting through the day. Getting through the day." God bless you, brother. Absolutely. Go ahead, Debbie.
The fellow you're speaking about, he is in the nursing home because I saw him when I was going to visit Bernice.
Oh, is he really?
And I spoke with him.
He's right up here, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll have to look for him next time I go in there.
Submits there, but he was there as a resident.
As a resident. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad at least he's got somebody helping him.
And he's getting meals and.
Yeah. Wow, that's a blessing for him, I'll
And
tell
there's a
you.
lady that was not here every week, but was here periodically, always sat in the back quite. hunched
Oh,
over.
sure, yeah. I know.
Well, I was trying to make it a point to speak with her. I
Yeah.
talked with her last Sunday.
Uh-huh.
And she said, "I'm moving away. I can't afford a place to live here." I guess she has family.
Oh, you're telling Diane Robinson. That's
it.
Diane, yeah.
Yeah, Diane.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's moving away.
Yeah, she's moving downstate. Well, actually, she's moving to North Carolina is what she said. We'll see.
Okay, maybe that's where she was going. I wish her well.
Oh, absolutely. She was baptized here, by the way.
Was she?
Yeah, I
She
baptized.
said, "I hate to leave." She said, "I hate to leave my church."
Yep.
One thing she said.
She came into my office one day during the week and said, "You know what? I want to be a member of this church. How can I be a member of this church?" And I said, I was telling her about, well, typically, are you baptized? She said, "No." I said, "You want to be?" She said, "I sure do." So we set up, it was a couple of weeks after that, a time and we did a baptism. And boy, she glowed. See,
Great.
and that was her church. This is her church,
That's what she said to me. This is, "I hate to
Right.
leave my church."
Yeah. That's good work. I gotta tell you, I really think that's good work. I think it's important. So I don't think we're gonna be locking the doors of the church, when services start. I think we'll leave them open and we'll pay attention to what's going on and do what we've done. If something happens and we have to do something different, of course, we'll do something different. But I think until that point, this is probably where we're going to be. At least that's what I'm sensing is coming not just from you, but from people in the parish. I don't sense a lot of emergent panic, for folks that are here.
It sounds as if we do anything, we need to just practice more what we do to make people feel welcome
Right.
and let common sense rule the rest, just.
Yeah.
The small ways in which we can make people feel welcome.
Yeah. Do we let them drink beer in the front pew of the church?
As long as we're not serving it.
Right. Yeah.
They're not underage.
Yeah. Oh, he wasn't underage. No. God bless him. Oh, he's no longer with us. He died too. But anyway.
And I think, I think what we're currently doing, which is constantly assessing the situation, if the climate changes, we'll react.
Exactly.
And I want to put in one more word
Before we close, if I could, and that is for the Binghamton Police Department. we have been very, very fortunate that when we've called the police, whether it's a canteen issue or whether it's some other issue going on, that they have responded extremely quickly. And we've had no problem with that whatsoever. And they've been very good at what they responded to. They weren't going crazy. They weren't, in any way hostile or anything like that. They were very helpful in what it was. The only instance that I could think of that didn't happen was I remember Gary was here during the week, and there was a fellow that was passed out behind the dumpster. Remember?
Yes.
And he tried to flag down police officers, and the policeman just ignored him. Oh, he said, "How do I get some help for this guy?" But by the time that he tried to, the guy had left. So, and had woke up and left. But that happens. We're downtown. That's gonna take place.
Also, we get tested just about every Sunday. You give your message. And then we walk out and there are people who are up there panhandling.
Oh yeah.
And it's basically every Sunday. So, we get.
Oh yeah.
I've had one in a year and a half for enforcement.
Yeah. Yeah. I get hit a lot. I have to tell you a story of my mother. God rest her soul too. She lived in downtown Denver, okay, in a high rise. And if you know where Lodo is, where Lodo is, they call it lower downtown. Used to be Skid Row. Now it's this real opulent Larimer Street, real opulent thing. Anyway, we were going to lunch. So we go down the elevator and I'm wearing my collar because I was there for a meeting. And we're walking down the street. And here's a guy in a collar and he's panhandling. And so I gave him $1. And Mom looked at me and she said, he's not going to spend that. I said, yeah, Mom, I get it. He's not a priest. Yeah, Mom. And she said, do you always do that with people? I said, no, I don't. But, I just felt at that point, what does it say to the world? What does it say to the other people walking by? That said, no, this guy, yeah, we know everybody knows he's panhandling. Of course they do. But that was his shtick. He put on a collar, and that way, some people would run away from him, but my mother was just floored. She said, how would you do that? Why would you do that?
I hope he blessed you.
Huh?
He blessed you.
He did. Bless you, my brother. He said, thought that was great. That was great. And I always tell people too, if you run into that, if you're uncomfortable, keep walking. Nothing wrong with that. There's lots of ways you can help. That's not the only one. And I'm sorry that happens to folks around here a lot too, because that's unfortunate. But it's just where we live in the world. Anybody else have anything else before we go ahead, Bob?
Go back to talking about homeless people. I had an interesting experience at St. Mark's and Shenango Bridge. When I was working, I used to stop on the way home at night to practice the organ. Walked up into the organ loft one night. Here's a fellow all set up with a sleeping bag and all ready to camp out.
Was the church open?
Yeah.
Yeah.
At that
Okay.
time,
Yeah.
the church was open, the sanctuary only, not the administrative areas, but the sanctuary was, yeah. And he said, oh, I got permission to park. I said, oh, really? So I called Mark. He said, no, I didn't give permission.
Camping out in the loft, Oh, my
It was
Lord.
all set up to be very comfortable.
Yeah. Wow. But I mean, they're tough problems in the world, aren't they? But I think I'd rather choose to be on the side of love than I would have, even if that means something else is going to happen. I'll be on the side of love. At least I can live with myself in the midst of that. So So thank you all for coming and being a part of this discussion. I appreciate it very much.